EtherealX. EtherealX, okay. So thank you also for the distinguished participants, I mean, who are keen to listen to us. Basically, I would like to make a couple of points only out of my own experience of having marketed PSLV during 2011 till 2016 or so. Because definitely we were aware. Can you project this slide? Yeah, okay. Definitely we were aware that PSLV is highly reliable workhorse for ISRO. And we were looking for some opportunity to market it to the global customers. And that was the time I had moved down to ISRO's commercial wing, mid of 2011. So we had 2 standing contracts with Space Imaging to launch Spot 6, Spot 7. Spot 6 we launched in 2012, early 2012, and Spot 7 later. So, the demand part I don't have to tell you, because in last year we are aware that more than 2,300 satellites were launched through 108 specific satellite launches. There were more orbital launches, but 108 were carrying satellites. And in Q1, quarter 1 of 2023, already 869 satellites have been launched. 869, you can just imagine the exponential growth of global launch market for satellites. And of course, more than 40 launches have been Falcon 9, and about 12% of these were remote sensing satellite, and more than 80% were communication satellites. Of course, there are various kinds. So 2023 is going to definitely witness more than 100 launches. So I don't have to talk about demand at all. But considering the demand that the world needs more than 100 launch missions to happen, what we can contribute from India, means other than SpaceX remote, it's very difficult scenario. You see, 2010, I can tell you, 2010, 2011 time frame, there was PSLV and GSLV Mark II flying from India. And Falcon 9 had not arrived. SpaceX had not arrived. We had Soyuz flying from Kazakhstan or Baikonur, as well as Kourou, because they had an agreement with Airbus people. And we had Arianespace flying, and a lot of other startups were coming up. Of course, we don't have much idea about China. We know Long March vehicles were there, but they were into themselves. And of course, Japan had Mitsubishi, M1, and all that. So there were very few launchers, and we were fortunate to become one of the prominent players during that part of time. So when we got into first launching Spot 6, we had a small Japanese CubeSat. We had a 6U satellite from Surrey, Strand 1. And it was a nice launch. Why I'm telling all this as a story is, whether Ariane model, PSLV model, in the big payload fairing, there is one king or prince who sits in the center, and some co-passengers, chota mota, were just fixed or patched wherever they could. And from that day, we graduated to launch 104 satellites in PSLV C-37. See, PSLV C-21 carried Spot 6 with 4 or 5 co-passengers. C-37 carried 104 satellites. But still, the concept of the dispenser had not come in very seriously. So we used to just patch satellites wherever possible. I mean, I could have shown pictures, but for the paucity of time. But it was during, I think, PSLV C28 or so, for the first time we appreciated the beauty of making use of, I'm not telling in terms of definitely technology development. I would like to tell more this as a story. We were used to make satellites. We in India, even today, satellite means a cuboidal structure, propellant tank in the belly, payload on the top, solar panels on the side, sensors in the bottom, and of course reflectors and antenna wherever they should be. Whether 3-ton satellite, 1-ton satellite, 100-kilogram satellite, you see what happens is, in case of a launch vehicle, it's extremely important that you completely occupy the volume within the payload fairing and also be within the mass. So when we first contracted to fly DMC-3, 3 satellites of 470 kg with 15-degree divergence, when we closed the payload fairing, at some critical points, there was only 70 millimeter of gap between the heat shield and the satellite. If the launch vehicle is not having good environmental quality, suppose takeoff time, vibration is more, satellites would crash inside. Fortunately, PSLV is one of the finest in that respect. Now with that evolution, this kind of things have been happening elsewhere also, that now the total concept is you totally occupy the volume space within the payload fairing and hit the brim of the mass limit of what you can carry. So if you can see here, the 3 satellites, SSLV is operational now, 34 meter tall, 2 meter heat shield fairing, lift-off weight is 120 ton. Of course, that is regarding vehicle. It's solid liquid propulsion. It can carry 500 kg to planar orbit. It can carry multiple satellites. PSLV, of course, is a wonderful vehicle. Again, solid liquid. 1860 kgs it can carry to 475 kilometer polar orbit, sun-synchronous orbit, and 1300 kg to sub-GTO. This has even done the Mars mission, you are aware. Carrying it to sub-GTO. Of course, a lot of Mars spacecraft was fuel. GSLV Mark II is also a wonderful vehicle, which is being produced in less numbers now, but it is solid liquid and cryo, 20 to 50 kg GTO, 600 kg LEO, okay. Then we have launch vehicle Mark III or GSLV Mark III as we call. This is our most recent. Overnight it became extremely popular because in the crucial time due to geopolitical considerations where OneWeb was under pressure to realize their full constellation. You see, this difficulty with constellations is all satellites envisaged in the constellation should be up at the same time. So, same time or within a short period of time. So, 2 of these LMV3 carried 36 satellites each. With that, OneWeb today is an operational constellation. Okay. So this can carry up to 4 tons GTO and 8,000 kg it can carry to LEO. And this is the one which is going to be used for ISRO's Gaganyaan also. But instead of the top payload fairing where you see the national flag, the human module will sit, capsule. Okay. So 1 or 2 things only about PSLV. See, lots of customers came to us because I was heading Antrix, I was marketing everywhere, and somebody will come to us, will you give us 330 to 350 kilometer orbit sun-synchronous? We told them, no, difficult because you are a co-passenger. You take the full vehicle we can give. As a co-passenger, we are going to 550. It is something like, I want to go from here to Jaipur. Somebody wants to get down in between. I'll say, go to Jaipur and come back. That kind of things we used to do. Seeing that requirement, PSLV 4th stage, they introduced restart. So if a customer pays for The fuel which will be burnt in coming back is same bus comes back and drops you wherever you want to after dropping the primary passenger. So now all our vehicles, I mean PSLV and LMV3 can do multiple start. The fourth stage can do multiple start, and different passengers can be offloaded at their desired spots up in space. Okay, this is a development which happened, which brought us more customers. And another development which PSLV did is the PSLV spent stage, fourth stage, which used to be just left there as a debris. So in the fourth stage, the payload deck proper, they put some lithium-ion battery. And so if some students, some researchers come in, say, I have developed a payload, I want to try it in space. So right now ISRO is offering free for those selected guys. So you can put it on fourth stage and battery, power, everything will come to you free. You develop the most disruptive payload. So these are, just one or two things only I'm trying to highlight. So these are the kind of developments which have happened with our own launch vehicles. But cost-wise, globally, we are not competitive today. But then because of our solid liquid or solid liquid cryo, that kind of thing, it might be difficult for us to reduce cost. But thing is, one thing what we have seen in space is access to space is a unique power, I'm telling you. See, critical times, cost will not come into picture there. You see, the kind of per kg cost which Falcon 9 offers in ride share, $5,000 per kilogram to even 3,500. I don't know whether it is really that cheap or something else. It is probably not possible for a government-owned agency, but still, as of now, the demand on all Indian launch vehicles is very high because Soyuz is in the background. So 2010, Soyuz was flying, Dnepr was flying. Ariane, they are in transition stage from Ariane 5 to Ariane 6. Okay, so what I mean to say is, irrespective of the cost, the demand exists because of reliability, timely launches and all. If we produce more PSLV, there would be more demand. And now yesterday, SSLV also expression of interest has come in. Both PSLV, SSLV may be manufactured by industry through ISRO technology transfer. And eventually everything may happen because ISRO may switch over to reusable launch vehicle and all that, as Chairman ISRO mentioned. So, with this brief introduction, I will request our distinguished panelists to begin with Mr. Thomas Carroll to make his remarks, then Manu, then maybe one or two questions we will have.
My remarks will be pretty simple. So my name is Tom Carroll. I'm with Space Logistics, a Northrop Grumman company. We launch many things into space. We have our own launch vehicles as part of Northrop Grumman, but I'm not here to talk about those launch vehicles. I'm not in that business unit anymore. I was very scared when I was on the propellant one because I was part of the Atlas V development and the cryogenic upper stage and fuels and SRBs, solid rocket propulsion. I also my background is with Khrunichev Space and the Proton with the new Proton M with the Breeze M upper stage and hypergolic fuels. So I was very glad that I wasn't, because I was not really prepared or authorized to speak about propellants and propulsion systems. But I'll say to that group that they seem to be on good track. It looks very good what they're doing, and they should keep up with what they're doing and not use the propellant for barbecues, except for barbecuing spacecraft in space. Cryogenic upper stage is very important in long coast phases to rotisserate, we call it rotisserating the spacecraft so we don't get a lot of sun exposure on the spacecraft. I'm a buyer of spacecraft. I'm a buyer of launchers now, and this looks very impressive. Did you say, does the Mark III that launched, for it to be able to launch OneWeb, it had to have at least a 4.5 meter?
36, yeah, 4.5.
4.5 meter payload fairing?
Yeah.
Okay.
5 meter, 5 meter, 36 satellites each we launched.
Yeah, yeah, I'm very familiar.
Soyuz was supposed to carry 31 satellites because that time we had no PSLV to offer.
One of my personal friends is CTO at OneWeb, so
Okay.
I have a number of good friends over at OneWeb. Yes, I understand it very well. I was looking at, for MEPs launches, I actually have an RFP out on the street right now for launching mission extension pods for the next 10 years. And I had difficulty getting feedback or contact back from ISRO, so it's one of the reasons I'm here, is to make contact. So you might be my right person to meet,
Not
or
me.
at least you can introduce me to if there's someone in here that's from the sales marketing arm of ISRO's GSLV Mark III, because I'm launching MEPs on a Espa Grande ring that would definitely exceed 3.4 meters in diameter. But I'm looking at launching multiples of 500 kilograms to GTO. But I'm going to give what I would challenge the marketplace to is GSO injection. So we're using electric propulsion, and I heard someone saying that with electric propulsion you get 6 months. I wish I got 6 months orbit raising. So my orbit raising is estimated between 8 to 12 months, depending on what the injection is at GTO. If I get 1,500 meters per second residual delta V, I can get up there in 8 months. With the other launchers, I'm getting more like 1,800 meters to 2,000 meters per second residual delta V, which is resulting in me taking 12 months. I don't want to be in the Van Allen belts for that long a period of time for my spacecraft. We've hardened them. We have a lot of experience at Northrop Grumman for hardening spacecraft. They're hardened, but I don't want to take the risk of spending too much time in the Van Allen belts. So what I would encourage in a marketplace is GSO in performance is very important that ISRO should look at for the future. With electric propulsion, I believe you'll see more and more looking for GSO, direct injected GSO. And that's, if I could pay for that, it's a matter of time versus money. And so the time is very valuable to me. 8 months of orbit raising means 8 months later delaying for me delivering life extension to a satellite. So I take that into consideration for when you're talking about launch costs. Launch costs is not as important as getting there, because if I don't get there, somebody's going to go dark on their spacecraft, and no commercial operator wants to go dark on their spacecraft, right? So that's what so I'm as a buyer of launch services.
Yeah. Actually, only one clarification. Both GSLV Mark II and Mark III will give you only GTO. PSLV will give sub-GTO, because some of our communication satellites we have launched using PSLV, their life of the satellite, of course with chemical propulsion, is only 6 to 7 years. 7 years. Here, whatever we launch using Mark II, Mark III, we are able to survive for 15 years.
Yeah,
15 years.
That's what I'm looking at.
We don't have GSO launches like Ron Breeze, as of now. Yeah, Manu, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it was super informative, and I'll pick it off where both of you left. I've noted a couple of points which were super interesting for me, because I think it's also, this is Manu from EtherealX. We are building the world's most powerful medium lift rocket, and it's also the world's first fully reusable medium lift launch vehicle. So in being able to do that, we've done what's not been done in the last 70 years. We've come up with our own rocket engine cycle to be able to operate our engines efficiently in both vacuum and atmosphere. So it's a peripheral arrangement of 30, 40 kilonewton engines that operate our second stage. It's a 2-stage to orbit. We can put 24.8 tons to the low Earth orbit in expendable configuration, 22.8 in partially reusable configuration, and around 8 tons in fully reusable configuration. And speaking of GEO, which is also a very important segment in the coming era of space exploration, and it has always been that way, we can put about 10.8 tons in expendable configuration and about 8 tons in partially reusable configuration, 0 in fully reusable configuration. So when we started off with EtherealX, there was a lot of question about why we started big, why to go for the medium lift segment. It was very skeptical for the entire market to kind of accept a bigger launch vehicle. But the irony is that the market has always said the otherwise. So to give you just a few practical numbers, like Dr. Hegde just mentioned, last year alone, we made $3.9 billion from just the medium lift market. Whereas since the inception of private small satellite launch vehicle players, since 2014, we've made about $224 million, right? That opposed to 1 year of $3.9 billion, out of which 91% was with SpaceX. They did 53 launches last year alone. So it is imperative that we also observe the kind of payload that is going to space in the next 10 years. So if you notice, the companies that are coming up, apart from just satellite manufacturers like InSpaceity or the other in-space services offerers, or you can also look at the habitable modules or any of these systems. These are, so what happens when LEO is regulated or when you move to GEO? Then what happens? Where does the market then lie? So it's, when you look at the launch segment, we always think at least a minimum of 1 decade to see where the market will then stand, right? I think one of the key things which also the Department of Space did beautifully was to set a vision of now, rather than driving the industry, to lead it, to lead the way by enabling the private players to pick up from where they've left. So the vision was set to capture at least 10% of the global space market by 2030. Now, how are we going to do that if we do not have bigger rockets? Now, this is one of the fundamental reasons why we started off with building the Razor Crest Mark I. And so this year, the 800 plus satellites that were put into space, we did so by having done until this June, we've put about 92 launches, out of which 72 were successful, and their payloads are now operational. Now, out of these 72 odd launches, we have 47 done by SpaceX alone, right? Now, that's on average more than 2 launches a week that they've done. So frequency was only a challenge until reusability was not in picture. The moment we've perfected reusability, the frequency is no more a challenge, which means that the market dynamics now is on agility and the price offering that you can do. And I would also like to address this amazing thing that was also pointed out as to, does SpaceX do a profitable launch, right? They charge $62 million on a launch. They make $12 million per launch. That is if they are going to go with external ride sharing and pricing on average of about $5,000 per kilo or to $7,000. Now, when they charge about $2,700 per kilo, which is the direct number when you divide their entire payload capacity by the amount that they charge, then they're only operating at about a margin of about 10%, right, despite having reusability. The cheapest launch that they did was doing the 7-time reused booster stage. They did it for the US Army. They launched at $35 million, which was still a profitable launch. So reusability makes wonders, and I think this is something that we need to stress, because the whole paradigm of having to mass manufacture rockets must end. So the fundamental philosophy is to operate with a minimum fleet size on a maintenance cycle and change the business model from revenue per launch to revenue per launch vehicle, right? So when we look at it in this way, it was also beautifully pointed out, the gray area in launch vehicles has always been between payload mass and payload volume. Now, how do you standardize and address that? So to make it in a very, put it in a simple way, we could probably have, let's say, a payload which is occupying almost 3/4 of this room, but probably would weigh only 2 tons or 3 tons. On the other hand, we could have a payload that would only be the size of 1/4 of this room and weigh much higher to up to even 10 tons. Now, to be able to strike the right balance between payload mass and payload volume, there must be one kind of standardization which can be achieved only through reusability in certain sense. And for instance, in our case, any launch that we would do, assuming the worst case, any launch that we do about charging above $5.6 million is a profitable launch for us. So irrespective of whether it is 20 kilos or 20 tons, we should be able to put the payload in orbit in a profitable launch, meaning with reusability in picture, you don't necessarily have to wait for the entire rocket to be full. Because nowadays, on average, you're paying almost $8 to $10 million even for a small satellite launch vehicle. And depending on the payload volume, there are restrictions. In the next 10 years, from 12 announced projects, including Kipper, I have not included Starlink though, and speaking of all the other constellations with Intelsat and Viasat and all of this, 6,982 tons need to be put in space in the next 10 years. That's almost 7,000 tons, of which the payload capacities are, the payload type are all mega constellations and modules and all of that. All high payload mass and high payload volume demanding launches. Right now, the only operational player which is really attracting the crowd is SpaceX, and which is why they're sold out until 2025 Q4, and with only rideshare being open. Apart from that, we have about 5 others, including us and ISRO, in this market trying to enter that segment. If all of us together do a single launch, we can put about 133 tons into the orbit. So to meet the demand of just 12 projects, each of us will still have to do a minimum 50 successful launches. And even assuming that 50% of them don't even come through, still each of us will minimum have to do about 25 minimum launches to put all of just these payloads into the orbit. So I think it is imperative for us to be able to capture that 10% of the global market. Having a bigger launch vehicle is necessary, and like Hegde sir just mentioned, there are certain limitations when it comes to being a nationalized space agency in terms of being able to cut down costs. Now, as private entities, we can establish supply chains by cutting down the costs and trying to compete with each other in the private segment. And so, for example, though it costs me only about $13.6 million to arrange an entire launch, to bring it to Launchpad and do it, I necessarily do not have to charge them anything above $13.5 million, because at the end of the day, I'm getting $8 million back in recovery. So if we are able to strike the right unit economics, I think we should be, and since we have a very good geographical advantage as a country, we think we'll be able to lead the way in terms of also bringing the cost down. And so when people ask us, but why are you doing full reusability in this segment? Because you're losing 16 tons. Well, the idea is the cash cow will always be the partially reusable vehicle for us, because we are only taking 8 tons in our fully reusable configuration. But when you look at the next 20 years, we should be moving to a much bigger vehicle, even after this 25-tonner. So though our cash cow will remain partially reusable one, the reason why we want to establish the full reusability is to be able to use that technology onto a bigger vehicle. And I think the power of launch, like you mentioned, now people are treating orbits like real estate. Everybody is pre-sanctioning one area of the orbit by putting their own satellites into orbit. And if we were to have that kind of power, I think it only also comes from being able to deliver the right amount of satellites that we really need to put in space. And it is having a lack of higher launch vehicle dynamics also kind of brings down the driving force of the constellation development in the ecosystem. And I think I was really happy to see today that earlier when we were sitting on the panel, we literally filled in the entire ecosystem. We had a launch vehicle manufacturer, we had an in-space service, we had the propulsion systems in place. So I think when we look at it, like I mentioned earlier, now ISRO has taken this amazing step of leading the way than driving it by leading the R&D, focusing on missions like Gaganyaan, and letting the private players actually take the reins towards developing a sustainable space economy. So I think I'll leave with that. Thank you.
I think if you all agree, discussions can happen over lunch also. It is already 1:20. Or if you have a quick question to anyone, that is also fine with me. I mean, I don't have constraint. Leave it to you all.
Can I say a disclaimer? I don't want to say agreeing about SpaceX's economics. They're a privately held company, and Elon and Gwen Shotwell are very litigious about people saying things publicly, so I had nothing to do with saying anything about their economics. But if you look at their government missions and their manned missions, you will find that the extremes are how they're doing their business is not on a per launch basis for revenue and profits. It's an overall business strategy because the amount of money they make on per launching a human is more around in the magnitude of $800 million per human. And for delivering pizzas to the space station, each delivery one they do, they get about $250 million. Yeah, so we do cargo delivery also. I'm just saying that there's an overall business strategy. They're privately held for a reason because he doesn't want to disclose his financials.
That's the apprehension even I mentioned about, because, yeah. When is your first vehicle likely to fly?
So we are planning to do our engine testing in December, and we are trying to do our first test launch of a smaller vehicle to test the engine and or the flight software in Q4 of 25. And the full-fledged test launch will be in Q1 27.
Where will you launch from?
We have two options right now we're evaluating. We're also in talks with the Tamil Nadu Defense Corridor also to see which one would be a better option, either Sriharikota or further down south.
Further south.
Yeah.
Great. Any quick question from the distinguished audience? Yeah.
Just an academic question. GSLV Mark II, why can it carry more load to GTO than LEO?
It is 6,000 kg. I have missed one zero. Sorry. No. I noticed it, but I thought nobody else has seen, so kept quiet. It is my mistake because I had retyped everything. Yeah, 6,000 kg to Leo.
Yeah, I'm looking at residual delta V. I measure all the launch vehicles by residual delta V. That's what I really want to know.
That gentleman has a question.
Oh, yeah. Professor.
Very futuristic question. When do we see launches becoming like flights? If you got on a flight, Mr. Carroll, you came from there to here in about 8 hours, 12 hours, like this.
Starship.
When
Starship.
when Starship comes through?
When Starship starts flying regularly.
So roughly about 5 years from now, it becomes so regular like this.
Part of his business plan is for on-planet, interplanet moving from place to place that I could get from North America to India in 2 hours.
And the space aspect of it, when we start launching satellites, the day we dream from there 6 months onwards, we are ready. And
Well, if you can build a satellite in 6 months, I'd like to talk to you. Because
before
right
that,
now,
nothing before that.
satellites are taking 3 to 4 years to build and more. So, but I believe Starship's plans is to be able to launch and relaunch in hours after landing to be able to turn around and relaunch. I think he has like a 2-hour window for relaunching a Starship. I've seen some of his messages. I've been through the factory. I've seen the production of Raptors. I've not been down to Corpus Christi, Texas yet. So, Boca Chica. I am relying on Boca Chica Gal for all my reports. Whoever Boca Chica Gal is down there, I love her, and she is giving great reports down there. And I always confirm it back with my SpaceX representation. Is that true? And they're always like, yes, what she's reporting is very accurate. Just listen to her. She knows what's going on down there. So I highly recommend follow Boca Chica Gal. Even if she rides her horses around the launch facility, that's okay. I don't care. It's a new strange world of social media. So, but hopefully it becomes more you buy a ticket. I mean, ultimately, I would really like to see I can buy a ticket to go on a launch vehicle. I have my spacecraft ready. I present my ticket, and they say, okay, you're going to go in the next 3 weeks or the next month, next 2 months.
I thought Rocket Lab was pursuing something like this. Maybe Manu is keeping an eye on this, something like that.
Yeah, Rocket Labs is doing the Neutron one, and it's also a very interesting affair because they also moved from the smaller segment to a medium one with a 15-ton vehicle. I think, yeah, that's where the future lies.
Further discussions over lunch. Yeah.
Thank you, panelists. I guess this was a very futuristic and promising session. We would like to head for our lunch, and the afternoon session will start at 2:30 at the respective halls as mentioned in. Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, distinguished chair.
All right, so who is ISRO sales marketing guy? Who took over for you?